Hey, what's up guys? And welcome back to another Reddit Stories video. You guys seem to keep loving these videos and keep asking for more and more. So let's do another Reddit video. So sit back, relax, and if you're new here, subscribe. It's the channel's goal to be at 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I think we can do it. So please subscribe. Part 4. Okay, so I have some things to report today. Actually, first I have to get something cleared up. In my area, Walmarts do not sell ammunition. I thought it would go without saying that if they did, I would have bought them when I was there. Now that that's taken care of, let me get to the point. Betsy Farrell has recently dyed her hair, and it's said that certain habits keep her young. So it is my mission. Last night, a paranormal researcher came to stay with me at the hotel I was at, and much to my surprise, he brought a priest with him. I chose to get a first-floor room since I knew that being on a different floor didn't hinder the Smilers from getting to me. I kept in constant contact with my wife, who, as you'll soon find out, didn't stay at her parents' house for the night. The researcher, whose name is Paul, gave me an overview of what I was dealing with, and I have to say, some of you guys nailed it. Since it was still daylight, he felt as if we would be okay discussing the situation at the hotel since we were already there, and then we moved back to our house. So, one commenter said that the house was a threshold, and that commenter was right. The priest and Paul agreed that if we were going to get to the bottom of this, we should start at the only place these things haven't evidently been able to enter. The information he relayed to me was to the best of his knowledge of the paranormal. What we're dealing with was a sort of skinwalker ghost hybrid. They inhabitate recently buried bodies, which explains their overall dirty look. As far as what they want with my family and I is still up in the air. The priest, Father John, asked if anyone in either of our families had recently passed, and the answer was no. I had my wife on speakerphone while we spoke about this. The only conclusion we could come up with was that the Smilers had us mistaken with another family. Kind of a cop-out if you ask me, but at least it was something. We made the hour-long trip back to our house. When we got there, the doors were shut and all the blinds were drawn, a difference since I had last seen my home. It was on the brink of dusk, so we hurried into the house and made sure the power was on before we ventured past the foyer. The first thing Father John and Paul did was walk around and unplug everything that could be used as a source of light. This pretty much included any and everything that was plugged in. Next, Father John salted all the entryways. Again, I know, I felt stupid for not doing this before at the cabin. I just think, with all the commotion, I should be allowed a slip-up or two. I've never dealt with this kind of thing before, okay? While Father John salted, Paul, myself, and my wife put about 150 candles throughout the house. My daughter sat on the couch watching a DVD on a portable DVD player. She knew it would have to be shut off when it got dark. We were taking the advice of a commenter that the Smilers feed off electricity. We got as prepared as we could, given the circumstances. Father John armed each of us with holy relics and kept a small container of holy water on each platform that surrounded us in the living room, in which we put ourselves. Father John. Many people commented to go to places with large populations, and while this is a good idea, it wouldn't have solved anything. If I wouldn't have gotten in contact with Paul, I have no doubt that finding a heavily populated and lit area is what we would have done last night. But it wouldn't be a permanent solution. I wanted to stop this, not just delay it. That said, I have to thank each and every commenter for your hypotheses, your tips, and your tricks. You have all given me invaluable information, and I truly believe my family and I would not have made it this far without your help. I chose the right route, posting this to r/no sleep. I have no doubt about it. Anyways, the sun set. Night had blanketed over our neighborhood, and I don't know if it was just me and my nerves, but it seemed darker than ever. My daughter had put away the portable DVD player, and we turned off all our phones, except for Father John's, as we figured having one line of communication would probably be a good idea. We basically all huddled in the middle of the living room while my daughter slept on the couch, our house illuminated dimly by the throws of candles we had lit. It was about 1 a.m. when it started. Paul happened to be looking out the window when the streetlights on either side about 3 houses down suddenly went out. He got my attention and the rest of us rushed over. The next set of lights went out. It was between this set going out and the next one that we finally saw them, limbering along in the Bernie light fashion they do, eyes glistening in the moonlight. I immediately saw the fear in Paul's eyes. He voiced his concern. I know I said what they were, but I've never seen one before. Thought, fucking great, lot of help you'll be now. Perhaps selfishly, but it kind of irritated me that he was about as skilled with these things as I was. However, at least he could see them. I sent my wife over to protect our daughter. Through all of this, their safety was my only concern, whether it seems like it or not. As they approached, I found myself once again frozen, while my eyes locked onto a set of theirs. I was shaken by Father John, and we went to the middle of the room and anxiously awaited them to reach the house. Sadly, there wasn't much we could do on the offensive side of things. While they slowly flailed their way towards us, I confirmed that both Paul and Father John had seen them, then asked why the cop couldn't. Father John and Paul concluded that it must be the house itself that makes people, besides myself and my family, capable of seeing them. Another semi-answer. I asked Paul if he had gotten any information on the house, and he said he had only had time to do a quick Google search on the property and was unable to delve further into its history and past occupants. I felt like that was where the answer lied. They eventually made it to the yard, and that's when they stopped walking and began waving, smiling all the while. All but one. It was the female that had let out the laughter the night before. She just stood there, back arched backwards, arms hanging behind her. She was expressionless. She hobbled her way up to the front door and knocked. Plain as day, as if she was a UPS driver, just knocked on the door. None of us moved. Then she pounded on the door, and kept pounding, and didn't stop until my wife screamed, "What?" We were met with silence, until the woman's smiler broke it. Pat shivered, her face paler and tan, then flushed red with the chill of sweat. "Ain, it's time for you to go," Father John responded. "This is not your home. This family owes you nothing. Be gone." The smiler let out the same shrill laughter I'd heard the night before. It was horrifying, and a sound I will never be able to forget. The other smilers crept up to the windows, all but one of which was covered by curtains. They started banging on the windows, but not breaking them. Now that I think about it, even their walk was less exaggerated than it normally was. I believe whoever said it was right. They do in fact feed off of electricity. They weakly banged on the windows while their female leader gave us a warning. People not keep him out of where he belongs forever. Father John asked who, and then it was over. The smilers were gone and the streetlights came back on. We all breathed a deep sigh of relief. But yet again, I was met with more questions than answers. Why was it time for us to go? Who was I keeping out of where he belonged? I felt the answers lied in the history of the house. Now, I love my wife dearly. She and my daughter are my everything. But even with the warnings I had stressed to her, she made a stupid-ass decision. For whatever reason, while we were all collecting ourselves, she walked over and opened the front door, presumably to check the porch and verify the female smiler was gone. Don't ask me why. I will never know what compelled her to do something so fucking ridiculous. As soon as she turned the knob, Father John yelled, "No!" But it was too late. The door flew open and pinned itself against the wall behind it at the same time the streetlights went out again. There stood the female smiler. Only she wasn't smiling. She looked rabid. She was breathing heavily, her eyes were popping out of her head, and her fists were clenched as she, for the first time I'd ever seen a smiler do, leaned forward. She looked down at the archway of salt. "Move, the salt, and we will show you mercy." Another, briefly read, cut to the chase. Red and black. "Mercy for what? What have they done?" pleaded Father John as he held up a rosary. He moved closer, and his presence did seem to have an effect on the smiler, who returned to her normal position, back arched backwards, arms hanging. "We have been nice enough. You have been the one to take issue," she said, as she flung her arm up and pointed her crusty finger at me. All I could think was, no shit I took issue. Dirty ghost, zombie, demon, limp walker assholes have been trying to take my family to do God knows what. With great kind truth, Father John retorted, "You will not haunt this family into submission." She stood there in silence for a moment. I am typing this about an hour after the events I've just described. But as she began to speak, as soon as the sun is up, Paul and Father John are going to go out and do their research, and she disappeared. My family and I are going to stay in our home, guarded by the salt which seemed to do the trick. The street lights once again came back on, electricity and the light poured in through the door as we uncovered the smilers potentially charged during the day. We all stayed where we were for what felt like an eternity. I will relay the information I get to you tomorrow, as well as my wife went over to comfort her. May not occur tonight. The three of us men reconvened in the middle of the living room, but for the first time throughout all of this, we needed to know about this house in order to figure out what to do about this problem. Once again, thank you all for your help and well wishes, and as always, wish us luck. Part 6. Well, my family and I spent the day at home, and it was ultimately an extremely boring day. Father John and Paul were out doing their research while we, essentially, sat in silence all day. We had been advised to use as little electronics as possible, so that took out any kind of entertainment we had, save for board games, which, to be honest, we've become too accustomed to technology to have that entertain us for any real length of time. RO Science Lab. Father John and Paul got back to our house at around 3 in the afternoon, and they came with information. Our house was built in 1955, and no, the land was not once a cemetery or ancient Indian burial ground or anything. The problem lies in a past resident. When we got the house, we knew it hadn't been lived in quite some time, nearly a decade. This was attributed by the realtor to the constant blackouts in the area. Apparently, houses in that neighborhood stayed vacant for quite some time before someone who decided they could live with the blackouts came across them. The last occupant of the house was a man named Lee Ruchel, pronounced Rickle, and his family, which consisted of his wife and daughter. Lee and his wife Georgia were elderly, and their daughter Carrie Ann stayed with them to take care of them in their old age. With this information, Father John and Paul were able to dig into the occupants. Lee suffered from Hodgkin's lymphoma but was an active member in the church community. When there was an issue with his Social Security, other members of the church banded together and took over his mortgage for him for nearly a year. Lee was a very well-liked man, apparently, but from what they read to me, it seemed as if he had a bit of a dark side. His wife and daughter were admitted to the hospital several times throughout their lives for what looked to be domestic abuse-related injuries. On the outside, though, all seemed well, and his wife was a loyal one, and his daughter a caring one. It seemed as though, even though they had their problems, they were still a tight-knit family. Lee died from his disease in the house in 1992. It wasn't revealed in which room or anything, but at least that was something. Georgia and Carrie Ann spent the next year together in the house, and apparently they got heavily involved in the practices of seances and speaking with the dead. in an attempt to locate Lee. This information was found due to a small fire that had happened in the kitchen, which was the result of candles being used during one of the seances. The realtor had informed us of the fire, but didn't reveal to us the cause, just that it had been caused by candles. We thought nothing of it. It had been fixed, so we didn't give it a second thought. In late 1993, Georgia passed away from natural causes in the city hospital. The house was inhabited solely by Carrie Ann for the next 6 months, and continued to be the site of many communications with the dead. For unknown reasons, Carrie Ann moved away, and the house sat vacant until we bought it in late 2013. Carrie Ann committed suicide last week and was buried in the cemetery in a plot next to her parents. Father John and Paul then gave their opinions on what they felt the issue was. They are under the impression that with the death of Carrie Ann, the Rochelle family is now back together, and they want their house back. We thought back to when I was spoken to for the first time with the phrase, "You've been here long enough, it's time to come home," and came to the conclusion that those were two separate statements, as in, you and your family have been here long enough, it's time to come home. I know this is a long shot, but it would fit the scenario if this was in fact the case. As far as them suddenly getting violent, it's thought that it was due to my apprehension to let them in. They had smiled and waved in a gesture of friendliness, and I had taken it the wrong way. When we left the house, they knew we would eventually come back, so they showed up at the hotel and then the cabin to continue to persuade us to leave the house for good. When I shot the smiler through the window, it apparently angered them. So they broke all the windows and came in, and were prepared to attack. Our guess is that due to the limited energy being used at the cabin, they couldn't defend against the knife attack, so they disappeared when I attempted to stab the woman's smiler. As for what was said last night, the whole, "You can't keep him out of where he belongs forever," is the angry side of Lee Rochelle coming out, demanding he get his home back. Our guess is that the large number of people are spirits that Lee has befriended in the afterlife to help in the effort to get his home back. Mind you, this is all conjecture. All evidence of what we're assuming this to be is circumstantial at best. For all we know, we could be totally off. I think that might be the scariest part. What we do know for sure, though, is that the salt worked. It fended them off last night. Also, the smilers seemed to respond to Father John's rosary, so that was a good line of defense too. The problem is we can't control the power outside the house, which, if they are in fact energized by the electricity, which then causes the blackouts, we can't defend ourselves in that way. Also, we have no idea why the smilers approached my wife and daughter first. Our only thoughts on that are that some of the smilers aren't necessarily on the same mission as the rest. Some of them may have ulterior, more sinister motives. I have to say it's extremely frustrating not knowing what exactly it is we're dealing with and working only off of semi-educated hypotheses. But alas, it was all we had. We reinforced the salt barriers and relit all the candles throughout the house in preparation for whatever the night brought. We then just waited, each taking turns sleeping while others kept an eye out. Nothing happened until about 3:30 a.m. Father John woke me up and told me he had heard something upstairs. We looked out the window, and from what we could see, all the power was on the street. Myself, Paul, and Father John made our way upstairs, each armed with a holy relic. We searched the upstairs but found nothing. As we were heading back downstairs, the door to the attic, the kind that swings down and drops a ladder, did just that, sending the ladder down with a loud crash. We nearly jumped out of our skin as we turned around. An angry-looking smiler, oxymoron I know, bobbed his way down the attic stairs. Father John started saying a prayer while Paul and I held up our rosaries. This smiler did not seem to be wholly fazed by the holy relics. It was as if he knew they would hurt him, so he wasn't so quick to advance on us. Instead, He almost tiptoed towards us, backing us down the stairs. I finally spit out, "What do you want?" and I just started whispering incoherently. Just then, 2 more smilers came tumbling down the attic steps like they had fallen. They got to their feet and moved ahead quickly behind their angry friend. Suddenly, the smiler behind the one that was slowly approaching us pushed the one closest to us directly into us. It hit Father John's cross and let out a shriek, and before it disappeared into thin air, it knocked us backwards down the stairs, and we all tumbled on top of one another as well fell, step after step.